One insult, one problem on a board, one quiet man who walked away from a dream, until the world laughed, and he decided to answer not with words, but with brilliance. The story begins. The air at Westgate High School buzzed with excitement. Students filled the sleek auditorium, chatter rising like smoke above the rows of seats. Teachers whispered in the corners, their eyes fixed on the large banner overhead, welcoming Dr. Malcolm Chase, mathematical mind of the century. Dr. Chase was no ordinary guest. He was a celebrated mathematician with best-selling books, viral online lectures, and a reputation sharper than a blade. Tall, silver-haired, and always dressed in tailored black suits, he walked like a man who believed gravity bent around him. His voice, deep and clipped, commanded attention the moment he stepped on stage. As he strode to the podium, the students leaned forward, notebooks out, eyes wide. The room fell silent as he tapped the microphone and smirked. "Mathematics," he began, "is the language of the universe. It builds bridges, guides rockets, saves lives. Unlike, say, history, which mostly remembers who built the bridge or who signed a paper centuries ago." Laughter rippled through the audience. Even a few teachers exchanged amused looks, but not everyone smiled. Sitting quietly in the third row, hands folded in his lap, was Mr. Elijah Boon, Westgate's longtime history teacher. He wore a brown corduroy jacket with frayed cuffs, round glasses perched on his nose, and shoes that had seen better decades. To students, Boon was an old, soft-spoken relic, kind but forgettable. He never raised his voice, never rushed, and always called his students young thinkers, no matter their grades. Dr. Chase continued, pacing the stage. "We all know anyone can memorize a list of names and dates, but solving real-world problems, that takes skill." More laughter, more nods. Boon adjusted his glasses, then slowly stood. His presence was quiet but impossible to ignore. "Careful, Professor," he said, his voice calm and smooth like old jazz. "History has its own kind of genius. It doesn't just remember what happened, it teaches us why." Dr. Chase turned, surprised. A hush fell. He raised an eyebrow. "Ah, the historian speaks. Tell me, Mr. Elijah Boon." "Well, Mr. Boon," Chase said, with a smirk curling at his lips, "how about a little test?" He turned, and with a dramatic flourish, grabbed a marker and scrawled a monstrous calculus equation across the whiteboard. Numbers, integrals, symbols that looked like hieroglyphs. It twisted and curved across the board like a dragon made of logic. He stepped back. "Solve this," he said, "and I'll admit history has more brains than I thought." The students gasped. Phones came out to record. A junior in the front whispered, "He's dead. No way he solves that." Another snickered, "He probably doesn't even know what calculus is." Mr. Boon walked to the front of the room and stood in front of the board. He read the problem once, then twice. His face didn't change. No panic, no pride, just quiet focus. Then, slowly, he turned. "Thank you, Professor," he said softly. And he walked away. The room exploded. Gasps, laughter, a few groans of disappointment. Students whispered as he took his seat again, calm and unmoved. Did he just walk away? Maybe he doesn't know how. He gave up. But Boon simply looked ahead, hands folded again, as if nothing had happened at all. Dr. Chase chuckled. "I thought so," he said to the crowd. "Let's move on." But something in Boon's eyes, something small, steady, and unreadable, lingered like a storm waiting to break. And Westgate High, caught in the middle of genius and ego, didn't yet know it was about to witness a lesson no one would forget. The days that followed the auditorium challenge were cruel ones. At Westgate High, the hallways buzzed with whispers and laughter, but it wasn't the usual school noise. This time, the joke had a name. Mr. Chicken. "Hey Boon, got any history facts for that math problem?" "Careful. Don't ask him to count past 10. Maybe he's allergic to numbers." Some students even clucked when he walked by. Others chuckled from behind their phones, watching the video clip over and over, of him silently walking away from the board, from the challenge, from the stage. But Mr. Elijah Boon never flinched. Every day, he showed up with his usual slow steps, his coffee in hand, wearing that same brown corduroy jacket with its threadbare cuffs. He smiled the same soft smile, taught the same thoughtful lessons, treated every student with quiet respect, as if nothing had changed. But inside, Elijah Boon was burning. Not with shame, not with anger, but with something deeper, a memory. Late at night, in his tiny one-bedroom apartment above an old bookstore, Boon sat alone at a wooden desk covered in old books and yellowed papers. The city outside was quiet. The glow from his desk lamp was the only light in the room. He reached into a box in the corner, the one he hadn't opened in years. Inside, wrapped in an old sweater, was a thick book, Advanced Calculus and Theories of Change. The edges were frayed, the spine cracked from use. He ran his fingers across the cover, like it was a photograph of someone he used to know. Boon opened the book. The formulas inside didn't confuse him. They didn't scare him. They whispered to him, like voices from a distant life. 15 years ago, he had been brilliant, a math prodigy, the kind of student who could solve problems college professors struggled with. He had dreams of becoming a mathematician, a scholar, a name in the textbooks he loved. He had earned a 50% scholarship to the university of his dreams. But back then, his family had nothing. They'd been living in rural California when the wildfires hit. The flames tore through their home, their land, everything they owned. He remembered the smell of smoke, the sound of his mother crying, the feeling of heat even weeks later. They lost it all. With no home, no money, and no way to cover the rest of his tuition, Boon gave up the scholarship, gave up the dream. Instead, he picked a new path, teaching history, the one subject he could afford to study at the local college. He learned to love it, learned to live with his choice. But now, as he stared at those equations again, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not regret, not pain, purpose. What if this wasn't just some silly challenge? What if it was a second chance, a chance to remind himself and the world who he used to be? The whispers in the halls didn't matter, because deep down, something inside Elijah Boon had started to wake up. And it was only getting louder. The auditorium buzzed with noise long before the assembly officially started. Students filled the red velvet seats, chatting in clusters, laughing too loudly, checking their phones. It was the same energy as always, loud, restless, bored, but today there was something extra in the air. A spark, a rumor. Everyone knew what they were waiting for. At the center of the stage stood Dr. Malcolm Chase, gleaming in his pressed gray suit and polished black shoes. He adjusted his gold-rimmed glasses as he scanned the audience like a hawk circling over prey. In his hand, the microphone looked more like a scepter than a tool. He carried himself with the arrogance of a man too used to being the smartest in the room. So, he began, his voice booming over the speakers. Has our dear history man found his calculator yet? The crowd erupted in laughter. Dr. Chase smirked, soaking in the attention. Or did he go back to memorizing kings and queens? More laughter. Students glanced around, looking for a glimpse of the history teacher, waiting for the next punchline. At the back of the auditorium, Mr. Elijah Boon stood slowly. There was no dramatic entrance, no flashy rebuttal. Just a man in an old brown coat walking down the center aisle. Steady, calm, quiet. All eyes turned. The laughter died. The energy shifted. Boon's face was unreadable, but his walk had purpose, like a man finally returning to familiar ground. The closer he got to the stage, the more uncomfortable Chase's smile became. Coming to try again, Dr. Chase said with a nervous chuckle, clutching the mic tighter. Boon didn't answer. He stepped onto the stage, walked to the whiteboard, and picked up the marker. His fingers didn't shake. His face didn't change. He paused. The auditorium held its breath. Then he began to write. One line, then another. At first, it looked like he was just sketching shapes. But slowly, something began to form. Something mathematical, something impossibly complex. The calculus equation from last week, the one that had made students groan and teachers look away, was being unraveled right before their eyes. The numbers flowed like a forgotten song. Clean, sharp, elegant. Boon moved with quiet confidence, each line of the solution building on the last. His brain worked like a machine that had never truly powered down, just waited, hidden, patient. Phones slowly lowered. Students leaned forward in their chairs. Teachers stood in the back, silent. Dr. Chase's smile disappeared. His brow furrowed. He took a step forward, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Line after line, Boon solved the equation. Not just correctly, but beautifully. There was rhythm in his work, grace in the way he moved the marker, like each symbol had a place and time, and he was simply letting it appear. Finally, Boon drew the last line, a small dot to finish it. Then he set the marker down gently on the tray and stepped back. Not a word, just the answer, flawless. The room froze, and then, slowly, a wave of gasps, murmurs, and stunned disbelief washed through the crowd. Dr. Chase stood frozen, his jaw tight, his eyes locked on the board. He blinked once, twice. The arrogance in his expression had cracked into something else. Confusion and fear. The history teacher had done the impossible. Boon turned, hands behind his back, and faced the audience. He wasn't smiling. He didn't need to. The silence said everything. For years, he had been the quiet one, the man with the slow voice and ancient maps. But now he was something else, a forgotten genius reborn, a storm that had been silent too long. And the story was just getting started. The auditorium was dead silent. For a long moment, no one moved. The only sound was the quiet hum of the ceiling lights and the soft rustle of paper from someone shifting in their seat. The board stood behind Mr. Boon, covered in the elegant marks of his solution, each line perfectly in place, every number telling a story of knowledge long buried but never forgotten. The principal, standing at the edge of the stage, looked completely stunned, her mouth parted slightly, as if trying to make sense of what she'd just witnessed. The students, still seated, didn't dare laugh now. Their faces were a mix of shock and awe. No one expected this. No one even knew it was possible. And then Dr. Chase stepped forward. The man who had towered over the school with his wit, his authority, his pride, looked smaller now. Humbled, he stared at Boon, his voice lowered to a whisper only a few could hear. "Who are you?" Boon turned to him, calm as ever, with that same soft, patient smile. "Just a man," he said gently, "who believes every subject tells a story, some with dates, some with numbers." There was something in his voice, something warm and sure. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't pride. It was peace, the kind that comes from knowing who you are, even if the world forgets for a while. From that moment on, everything changed. The same students who once rolled their eyes at Boon's history lectures now sat in the front row, eager, curious. They started asking more questions, not just about kings and wars, but about life, about patterns, about possibility. They had seen something unforgettable. Dr. Chase, for his part, changed too. He never mocked another subject again. In fact, a month later, he asked Boon to guest lecture in his own math class, to explain how history and logic both shape the world in ways numbers alone never could. Boon didn't brag. He didn't remind anyone of what he'd done. He just returned to his small classroom, the worn-out maps, and the quiet chalkboard, with a new spark in his eyes. But something inside him had awakened. That night, after the assembly, Boon sat alone in his apartment, staring at a faded acceptance letter from a university he never got to attend. It had been tucked away in a drawer for 15 years, since the wildfire in California took everything. Now he wasn't staring at it with regret. He was staring at it with hope. "I'm ready now," he whispered to himself. And he was. That summer, Elijah Boon enrolled in evening classes at the university he'd once dreamed of attending. With every lecture, every exam, he felt himself come alive again. Not because he had something to prove, but because he finally gave himself permission to return to the part of him that never stopped dreaming. 2 years later, he walked across the graduation stage, older than most, wiser than many, with a degree in mathematics. The quiet history teacher had become something no one expected. A student, a scholar, and a man who never let the world tell him what he couldn't be. He had won. Hope this story moved you the way it moved us. Sometimes life gives you a second shot, and when it does, take it with both hands. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with someone who needs a reminder of their hidden strength. Drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. Check the description for other videos and art you may like. Thanks as you support us. See you in the next video.